Well, I'm Brett Hirsch. I want to welcome you back to our course for the Real Estate Agent Tax Cut Library. In this section, we're going to be discussing a home office deduction. If you've been following along in our course and our lesson list, you're probably going to notice that the PowerPoint in this presentation is a little different. That's because we have updated this information. With new information that came about, we also had a little bit of a sound issue with the quality of the previous lesson. That was this lesson. So here we go. This is revised and updated. All right, so here we're going to discuss an introduction to the home office deduction, and also we're going to cover the simplified method of taking the home office deduction. Quick overview of the home office. You're going to notice this lesson's out of order. Usually, if you did it the way the tax return is, this would actually be one of the last courses, but because it's so important, we want to move this into the front section of the course and also ties very much to your auto deduction. It's very important if you want to maximize your auto expenses that you have a qualified home office. So I just mentioned the main purpose of the home office deduction. It's not necessarily a large expense, but it helps you maximize that auto deduction. It's a relatively small deduction for most individuals. Sometimes when you rent, it's a little better, depending on the square footage of your apartment or the house that you're renting. You're going to report this on Form 8829. This is expenses for the business use of your home. You're only going to use that form, however, when you are deducting the actual cost, using the actual cost method. If you're using a simplified method, you actually don't need the Form 8829. But if you're going to use 8829, there you go. That's what it looks like. The home office deduction, when you take it, is recorded on line 30 of Schedule C. There are two methods to using the deduction, as we discussed earlier: the actual cost method, which you would use the 8829 for, or the simplified method. Now, the losses are limited with the actual cost method, but you're allowed a carryover. If you have a loss from your business, it can create, the home office deduction can create a little bit of a loss, but all the items aren't deductible in the current year. They're actually carried over the following year. However, if you use a simplified method, there's no carryover. It's simple, but you don't get the carryover loss, so it can't really create a loss. We'll discuss that a little bit more when we get into the simplified method. Now, the actual cost method, it is a lot more complex than the simplified method, which is one of the reasons the IRS created the simplified method a few years ago, was to cut down that complexity. And they also found that when they audited somebody with the home office deduction, they were just tearing them up if they were taking actual cost methods, because they really don't understand the rules that we're going to teach in this course. But it does require intensive record keeping, because basically you need to prove all the expenses related to your home and your home office if they're part of the deduction. It requires depreciation and a cost proration allocation of that depreciation based on the square footage of the home. We'll discuss that in the actual cost method, and it can be quite complex. The simplified method, however, is, well, it's simple. All you have to do with that is really show the square footage of home office and show that it's a qualifying home office, which we're going to discuss now. When is a home office deductible? When does your home office qualify for a deduction? Well, it's a room, an area, or even part of a room that is used regularly and exclusively for your business, for your current business, regularly and exclusively. We'll discuss that a little bit more. Regularly means consistent and ongoing use. Kind of a vague term, but it doesn't mean you use it once a year. You're going to use it once a month, well, several times a month, once a week, consistent and ongoing. It's not just a space you have there that you say it's your home office. You actually have to use the home office. Kicker, however, is you can only use that home office area for business. It has to be exclusive, meaning it's only used for the business. And it also, the home office has to be your principal place of business. We're going to go over that here in a second, right now actually. Now, it can be a place to be your principal place of business, means your main place of business. It can be a place where you regularly meet with clients at that location in your home office. For most realtors, it's probably not going to be the deal, but it is allowed for that. You can have a separate structure that is used only for business. Yeah, you might have that. Most realtors don't. And here's kind of the cool thing. It can also be the area where you conduct administrative duties for your business. This is the kicker. This is the cool thing. This is what allows most small business owners to take the home office deduction, because most of them are not performing work inside their home. They're usually performing that work, actually meeting with clients and doing that things outside of the home where the work is done. Particularly, let's say like realtors or a plumber or whoever. They have an administrative place to do their administrative work. Now, conduct administrative management. If you have no other fixed location to perform these activities, If you have one or more business location, where do you conduct most of these activities, which we'll be discussing in a second. These administrative duties can consist of scheduling appointments, keeping your calendar, researching for clients, where you keep your filing and keeping records, where you do your filing and keeping your records, the computer that you use, the desk that you use to research listings, many places you make appointments, where you do your bookkeeping. They can also include banking and paying your bills, and other, and where you manage others to perform these duties for you. Like when you're scheduling home inspections, when you're scheduling folks to go out and repair with this or that, when you're calling, wherever you do your duties. It has regularly and exclusive use for your business. If you have more than one business location, you want to ask yourself, where do you conduct most of these activities? Maybe you're allowed to go in your broker's office and do some work there. Maybe you have a cubicle that's shared and not yours exclusively, that you do use sometimes. But the thing is, where do you do most of your work? And if it's your home office area, guess what? You can take the home office deduction. And we want you to take it because we want you to maximize those auto expenses. Now, you must be able to prove regular and exclusive use. It must really be used for business. Your home office must really be used for business. It has to be used regularly and exclusively. You just can't say you have one and then you can't prove you use it. We'll discuss how to prove the deduction later in this lesson. Some notes on exclusive use. This is really important. It has to be an area only used for business. Kitchen table doesn't qualify if you eat there. If you have a kitchen table that you don't use except for business, which is, some people actually might because people don't always eat at the kitchen table anymore. If you can prove it, yeah, that would count. That area would count. If the kids use the area for games or do their homework, that's not exclusive. If you're using it for something else, that area would not qualify. Has to only be used for business. For example, let's just say you have a guest room. That is your home office. However, the in-laws or other family members or whoever stays in there just even a couple times per year, guess what? That's not exclusive use. That area does not qualify. It has to only be used for business. Now, here's the cool thing though. It can be part of a room. Will also qualify, as I mentioned earlier. If you have a small desk, let's say in a kitchen that's off the kitchen, or maybe in your rec room or your living room, just an area that's only used for business, the desk and a little area surrounding it, that's exclusive if you only use it for business. If you have a desk and a filing cabinet in that guest room we discussed that your in-laws use, it's only used for business, that desk and the area immediately surrounding it, that part of the room can be used as a home office and it can qualify. Here's actually a list of how you qualify for the home office. It's going to be too small for you to see. Should be in your resources if you want to print it out. But anyways, you can pause this and take a look at it if you're able to see it. That's a little flow chart. Now, how do we go about proving home office use? Because you think about it, the burden of proof is on the taxpayer. So on you, the taxpayer, and you may be, you may have to prove it years after you used it. I mean, the audit may be 2 years after you file your tax return, if you get audited. That is kind of rare, but it does happen. Your burden of proof is to prove it. How are you going to prove that home office was used where maybe you don't use it for a home office anymore? The auditor may want to see the home office. That does actually happen, particularly if you have a substantial size deduction. You want to make sure if it does happen and you're still using it, you want to make sure there's no other items in that area. You got to make sure it's clear of personal items. Like I say, if you have a desk in that one room, in a room where you have laundry, the guest room, and you have laundry piled up on it, that's really not exclusively business use. If you have kids' toys around, probably not business use. Have to be able to show business use. If you're claiming a room that can only be used for business, if you're claiming a whole room, as I said a minute ago, make sure there's no toys in there, making sure there's not a guest bed in there, make sure it's an office. It's legitimately used exclusively as an office. Not to store a bunch of personal items, not to put your kitchenwares and that things in it. That area that you're claiming is only used for business. It's not a storage room. Let's just say that. It's an office. If you're claiming part of the room, only that area counts for business use. That would be your desk and the area immediately around it, or whatever you're using, the filing cabinets, whatever you're using in that area. A good way to prove your deduction is take a picture of that area and to save with your tax materials. Now you can take a picture with your phone, upload it, save it in your file with your tax return. Simple way to do it. That way you have it. And most folks won't do that. So if you do get audited and you have that picture, that's going to go a long way to helping you prove your exclusive and regular business use, believe it or not. Use may change over time, as I mentioned earlier, so make sure you do that before you change the use of it. The IRS has 3 years after you file the return to audit and to make changes, so you may need to keep those records for at least 3 years to prove that your area was used as a home office. And again, just to remind you, the burden of proof is on you, the taxpayer. It's not the IRS's burden to prove that you didn't do it, or you didn't use the home office for business. It's your burden of proof to prove that it was a home office. And if you can't prove it was, you don't get the deduction. It's pretty much that simple. Okay, so let's go to overview of the deduction methods, which we discussed very briefly earlier in this lesson. What you can deduct, there are 2 methods. The simplified method, which will be discussed in the rest of this lesson, and also the actual cost method. Now you can switch between these 2 methods year after year, which is really cool. Depending on the year, depending if you're lazy one year or you get a better deduction taking the actual method versus simplified, you can do that. However, when you do it, you cannot change it later. You cannot later amend the return and change your decision. Once you make the decision, it is final. If you started business this year in your real estate business, or you only use the office for part of a year, you must prorate based on the portion of the year that you use that office. And we'll discuss that with a simplified method here in just a few moments. Deductible expenses when the office does not qualify. Let's say, even if you don't have a home office, let me go over some expenses you can still qualify. Maybe you have a home office that's not used exclusively for business or regularly for business, but you can still take deductions related to your home office. It'll be on other sections of the Schedule C, but it will not be on your 8829 because these really aren't home office expenses, but they're items you can still deduct. This could be a separate landline. If you have a separate landline coming to your home, the first landline is not deductible. It's an old rule where most folks had landlines, but you have to have a separate line for business. So you have a separate phone number for business that comes over your line or over the internet for your business. You can deduct that separate landline even if you don't have a home office. Your business computer, fax machine, office supplies, office furniture, if it's used for business and only for business, you can still deduct those. Even your office furniture, if it's used, say 80% for business, you can deduct 80% of it. You can depreciate 80% of it. Internet, you can still take the internet. You must prove a reasonable percentage, and based on, let's say, the bandwidth or the amount of time it's used. Now that many folks have everything streaming through the internet now, be your television, even your phone, your home phone, the security system, you have to prorate that based on the amount of that time that is actually used for business. So the percentage is kind of getting lower and lower over the years because you use the internet for it's such a resource for so many things now. Or in any other ordinary necessary business expenses, which we discussed in an earlier lesson, of course, the definition of ordinary necessary. Basically you prove it is beneficial to your business and it's used for business. So this is a relatively long lesson. Let's move into the simplified method. The simplified method is a simple calculation. That's, of course, why it's called simplified. It was introduced in 2013. You don't have to do a lot of record keeping with it. And one of the reasons it was introduced in 2013 is because people are horrendous with the actual cost method. It's pretty complicated. You got to depreciate your house. You probably want to actually have a professional help you with the actual cost method, but we'll discuss that when we get to the actual cost method. No record keeping is required other than proving you have a home office. It's actually less risky because your chances of making a mistake, relatively simple. It's probably not going to be audited near as much. At least we've found so far, it's really not. It's kind of almost like a safe harbor, let's say, in tax world. It's best for a home office, a small office relative to the size of your house, because the actual cost method would be, lower. It would be lower actual cost method because you have to be deducting a very small percentage of those expenses due to the size of the house versus the size of the home office. It's best if your expenses in the home office are low, which I kind of alluded to just a second ago. It's also best if you're not interested in the pain of tracking all those expenses, or you're just not that organized to track all your home office expenses. You don't want the headache of it. You still got the simplified method. You don't have to depreciate your home, which is good because depreciating your home is both complicated, and when you sell your home, even though you can exclude some of that gain now, or if not all that gain based on the number of years you're in the house, under current law, you still have to recapture what's called depreciation. Let's see here. You do not have to reduce the mortgage interest or the property taxes on Schedule A. It's required when you get the actual cost method. You'll see how that works. It's pretty complicated. It cannot create a loss, however. It cannot create a loss, whereas the actual cost method can create somewhat of a loss. The deduction is going to be limited to profit before the deduction. So let's say your profit in your business is $300 and your home office deduction using the simplified method, let's say it's $600. You can only deduct the $300 to bring your income to zero because it cannot create a loss. There's no carryover of a disallowed deduction. The deduction is lost forever with the simplified method. All right, how to use the simplified method? Well, you're going to deduct on page 1 of your Schedule C. It's going to be on line 30. You get $5 per square foot up to 300 square feet. So up to a $1,500 deduction. That's your maximum. Still not too bad based on the square footage of your office. A lot of times we find that does go along with using the actual cost method a lot of times. Depending on the relative, it's close. Let's say a lot of times it's close. So if you use part year, you're going to average the square foot for part of the year. As we discussed earlier, you have to prorate it. Here's a part year example. Let's say you start in September, which means you use it for 4 months. You use the home office for 4 months. You use 300 square feet for 4 months. You do a little math here. You take your 300, you multiply it by 4 months, you divide by 12 months. So what you end up here is 1,200 divided by 12 is 100 square feet. You get to deduct 100 square feet. You get a $500 deduction. There's where you deducted that. Basically, you put the square footage of the home and the square footage of your house right there, square footage of the home office, square footage of the house, and you just throw it there as your deduction. Pretty simple, pretty simple. And I think that is it for this lesson. So thank you so much, and we'll see you in the next lesson.